Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the very first NCCM Canadian Muslim Town Hall with a federal party leader. Yes, you can clap for that. And thank you all for being here this evening. You know, it's a weeknight. The first week of school also is very busy for a lot of people, and I know some of you maybe have commuted from parts of the city to be here this evening. So thank you so much for taking this evening to be here with us. And tonight's event is sold out. It is a free event, but registration has sold out, and it really shows us how important civic engagement is to the Muslim community. So thank you so much for engaging in this, and I want to ask you guys to give yourself a round of applause for that. So my name is Janelle Amasa. I'm a reporter with City News, and I'm going to be serving as your MC for this evening. And I'm so excited to be here, and I was really excited to have been invited to be a part of this really important series that NCCM is putting on for you. And this event is a first for the Canadian Muslim community, and it is organized by the National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM. And they're a national, non-profit, non-partisan organization that works to protect Canadian human rights and civil liberties, to challenge discrimination and Islamophobia, and to build mutual understanding and advocate for the public concerns of Canadian Muslims. Yeah, give them a round of applause. They're doing really important and really good. Now, NCCM is organizing this series of Canadian Muslim Town Halls in the lead up to the federal election with their incredible community partners. They're not doing this alone. So along with NCCM, this evening is organized alongside the Canadian Muslim Vote. You can move back to the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. Give a round of applause. The Black Muslim Initiative. The University of Toronto Muslim Student Association, and the Institute for Islamic Studies here at UST. So it really is a joint collaborative effort by the community. Now, before we get started, of course, I do want to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. To give you a little bit of a preview as to what's going to be happening this evening, we'll be starting off with a conversation between NCCM's Executive Director, Mustafa Farouk, and the leader of Canada's NDP, Jagmeet Singh, of course. And that portion will be followed by questions from community partners, and then it will be an open town hall. Now, the questions for the town hall will come from you, we're going to take most of those questions from social media. So we're asking folks to post on Facebook or on Twitter, and they can use the hashtag NCCM Town Hall. Now, if you don't have a device or you don't have access to social media, you can also write your questions down on cue cards, and there are volunteers, I am told, who are supposed to wave to me so that I can point at them. Oh, yes, there they are, with cue cards. So you can flag them down either now or afterwards when the Q&A portion happens. Or maybe if you already know that you'd like to ask a question and you want to grab a card now so you can think about it, maybe raise your hand so that the volunteers can pass you a cue card, and they'll come around and collect them a little bit later. So just keep those hands up for those volunteers. They can pass around those cue cards. And just really quickly, we know that evening prayers will be happening sometime through the event. So for anyone who wants to make salat, you can do so. I believe it's upstairs, but if you go out to the hallway and ask for the volunteers, they can direct you to that prayer space. Okay, so all of that is out of the way. I think that's all the housekeeping. We're really excited to get the evening started. So without further ado, I want to dive right in and welcome to the stage Mustafa Farouk, the Executive Director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And joining him, of course, is the man of the evening. Please welcome the leader of Canada's NDP, Jagmeet Singh, to the stage. I'm going to hand it over to Mustafa, who's going to speak.
Peace be upon everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to start by welcoming you all to tonight's event. It's so lovely to see so many folks come out, and we know that more folks are going to keep trickling in. I love your city, from Edmonton, born and raised, but I don't love your traffic so much. So, as we continue to have folks come in, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you all so much for coming today and being part of this conversation. Also, of course, I wanted to give a big thank you to the leader of Canada's NDP, Jagmeet Singh. So, as we begin our conversation tonight, obviously we're thinking about October 21. We're thinking about the federal election. We're thinking about the implications that election night is going to hold for the next 4 years. But as I was thinking about October 21 and preparing my remarks for today, I couldn't help but think about another date. And I couldn't help but think of January 29th, 2017. On that day, January 29th, 2017, 6 members of our family were taken from us in Quebec City. I'm going to take a moment to read their names. Ibrahima Berry, Mamadou Tano Berry, Khalid Al-Qassimi, Abu Bakr Tabti, Abdul Karim Hassan, and Azzuddin Sufyan. Allah yarham. On that day, Islamophobia touched all of us in the worst attack on a religious institution in Canadian history. And I think all of us can remember where we were when we heard about the Quebec City mosque attack. So as we begin this discussion, as we begin this conversation, I want to premise my remarks that in this discussion, we're grounded in thinking about that day, this attack that terrorized the community. And so if I come on strong, it's because I feel strongly. And we are a nonpartisan organization, but we believe that every leader, like Mr. Singh, who puts their foot forward to stand and to say that they would like to become the next Prime Minister, that there are questions that Canadians and Canadian Muslims have about safety, about security, and about the future. So without further ado, let's get into it. Sure. So my first question is a question that we know is on many folks' minds. And the question is about jobs. A 2015 report from the Canada Dawn Foundation found that unemployment amongst Muslim Canadians was 6% or 6 points higher than the national average. Obviously, I mean, there are questions about race and racialization, about economic stratification that play into that. So how do you, Mr. Singh, plan on addressing questions of jobs for folks?
Sure. Thanks for the question, and thank you to everybody who's here today. Thank you for taking your time out. It's an honor to be able to share some time with you. Time is the most precious thing we have, I think, and so thank you for sharing that time. You touched on part of the reason is there is racism that exists in our society. Systemic racism means that people who apply to a job with a name that doesn't sound like the majority population sounding name will be potentially discriminated against. And so that's one element of systemic racism that exists, whether people apply for positions in institutions, in state institutions, government institutions that exist. I think something that perpetuates it, and something I think is deeply troubling, is in 2018, the government of Canada released a report that outlined threats to security in Canada. And in that report, they used very broad language, essentially grouping all Muslims together and effectively saying Muslims were a security threat to Canada. Now, that was a heinous report. It also targeted other minority communities like Sikhs. And we called for that report to be changed because effectively what was being said by the government of Canada was that an entire population, because of their religious beliefs, were a threat to Canada, which would further existing Islamophobic beliefs. And if there was systemic racism that already existed, it would be perpetuated if a state, basically the Canadian government, essentially confirmed that bias that might exist by saying, yes, they're a threat. So we worked hard to remove that and say that is horrible to broadly group an entire community that way. So that language was changed, but that lasted for about 6 months. So 6 months that had a lasting impact, a negative impact, where effectively the public was told by the government, by a credible source, that these are folks to be afraid of. That's horrible, that's wrong. So some of the solutions that I really I think about a young person, talented, who wants to apply for a job, who's got so much passion, and keeps on getting denied when they apply just because of their name, maybe because of their religion. And I think about some of the things we can do. So at the federal level, one of the things I think would be an effective tool would be to have blind applications. So an application where it's numbered and there isn't a name associated with it. So it would maybe preclude or prevent some of the...
like name blind.
Exactly. So that might be one system that we can do at the federal level. We have full control over that. There's a number of federal jobs that are available for people in the federal government and in other federal regulated industries. That could help about 1 million people, 900,000 people are under the federal regulated system. So that's a significant group of people that we could start with and provide some leadership around how do we prevent bias based on name. That's just one of the many ways. But I think the main thing is having the volition to, one, call out that this exists and acknowledge that there's people that are being denied jobs just because of who they are and their name. And secondly, the courage to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that a little bit. So today, NDP put out a statement saying that they, tonight at our town hall, is going to make an announcement about racism and Islamophobia. Tell us a little bit about what that announcement is going to be tonight.
Sure. So some of our commitments, one is to be very clear around calling out and denouncing Islamophobia. But that's already been done, and people do it regularly. So we need to go beyond that. So a couple of things that we want to do is you talked about one of the worst attack on religious minorities or religious communities in the history of our country with the Quebec attack, and it rocked the Muslim community. I know a lot of my dear friends were shaken horribly by that, but it rocked all of us. I think everyone was shaken by that. I remember my brother and I talked about the impact of that and how much it rocked us. We saw horrible incidents happen in the States. There were attacks on Muslims and Jewish communities and Sikhs in Wisconsin. And we thought that was something of the States, not something that was Canadian. It happening in Canada really shook a lot of our confidence in the safety of being in Canada. So that was a big thing. So to build on that, we want to give more money to hate crime investigations. So in many jurisdictions, many cities, there's a police division where they don't have a specific hate crime division. So if something is based on hate, based on Islamophobia specifically, or any form of hate, it's not prosecuted in that manner, it's not investigated in that manner. And I think we're missing out on some of the denunciation that we could actually use, the tools that we could use to call that out specifically. So that's one thing that we're announcing. The other piece, there's been work on the no-fly list, and that's something that is just a horrible...
That's something that NCCM has been talking about.
Absolutely, NCCM has been a leader in that. There's a number of community groups.
No-fly list kids, of course, big shout out to them.
Yeah, big shout out to no-fly list kids. I mean, I think that's something that is a basic thing that we've got to get down to. Why is it that young kids, just because their name are on this list, we need to be more sophisticated in ensuring that people aren't being targeted just in this blanket approach. We also want to make sure we look at some of the discriminatory practices like carding and calling an end to carding at the federal level and ensuring that that happens beyond that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this later on, but I think beyond the denouncing the policies, investing in hate crime investigations, ending carding, we also need to look at some of the root causes of division. And one of the reasons why people are being exploited to hate and to fear others is people are afraid of their own lives. There's a lot of people who can't find housing, who are worried about the future, that insecurity and precarity in their lives, that insecurity is being exploited by some politicians, and they're using it to divide us by saying it's the fault of New Canadians, it's the fault of refugees, it's the fault of Muslims. And that exploitation happens because people are afraid and worried about the future. So I make the argument that if we fight economic inequality, make it so that people can actually find a good house to live in, can find a good quality job, we can afford to live, that we can take down some of the climate of insecurity and fear that allows people to be exploited to create that increased division.
Mm-hmm. So the most recent Stats Canada data show that there has been a 41% increase in attacks against religious institutions. 41%. Imagine for a second that there was a 41% increase of burglary or a 41% increase in homicide. We'd be having a national conversation about it. So I mean, obviously, you've put forward a number of recommendations, but the reality is that for many folks here, the questions about Islamophobia are a lived reality. And I can tell you that the Muslim community has felt this. For the first time this Ramadan, many mosques had security for the first time. And this is just tragic to see. And it's, equally tragic to see that for the first time, and unfortunately not, probably not for the last time, synagogues, many, even in my hometown of Edmonton, had security. In 2019, the fact that a synagogue in Canada needs security is deeply tragic. This isn't the country we believe in. It's not the country we promised. So you talk about things like hate crime units. And obviously we agree that hate crime units are important. They gather data, they do other important things. But I want to dig into this question a little bit because I'm concerned that when we think about hate crime units as a method for solving racism, we ignore the fact that, for example, many police agencies have hate crime units that don't actually charge anyone. So like, for example, the Ottawa Police Service didn't even know whether they had a hate crime unit or not. I mean, that is how irrelevant hate crime units were to them. Because the reality is that we have a criminal code where the sections in the criminal code that apply to hate crime legislation are very difficult for police officers to use, including require the consent of the Attorney General. I can tell you that in Edmonton, for example, at an LRT station, there was an individual who held up a noose to two hijabi students and said, "This is for you," and then began singing the Canadian national anthem, and there were no charges filed. No charges filed. And this is a common story. We had an arson attack at the Edson Mosque. No charges were filed. So how do you think that hate crime units are going to address this much broader problem about the fact that Muslim communities report incidents? We've seen, a year ago we had a 151% increase in hate incidents targeting the Muslim community. How will hate crime units, be a panacea for solving those other questions?
You touched on a lot of points. I mean, first off, it is really, really difficult for Muslims right now. And there's no way to deny that. That is the reality. There's a lot of fear. There's a fear based on, particularly for if you're visibly a Muslim. So for hijabi sisters, it's very, very difficult.
And as of course for our Sikh brothers and sisters. And
of course, Sikhs, feel the brunt of Islamophobia. So in case anyone had any doubt, I mean, my brother really recently.
And we're going to touch on that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a sad thing, but yeah, we're in this together. I mean, people are being targeted for who they are, and that type of hate is just wrong, period, no matter who it's targeted against. But it is very clear that Muslims are being targeted. It is very scary. And the mention of security during Ramadan, the idea that people can't go to a place of prayer without thinking twice about whether it's safe or not to go to, a place where you expect to be so safe and to be secure. So policing can't be the solution on its own. It's never going to be the solution on its own. But what we need to do is make it more relevant. So to your point, where there's divisions that exist that are not functioning, there's other communities where there is no division. It needs to be set up. I think you touched on the idea of making the laws easier to apply. I mean, in a scenario like that, it's pretty obvious that if someone's effectively uttering a threat to kill somebody, and noose is related to killing someone, and doing that to two Muslim sisters, especially if they wear hijab, it's very overtly, clearly something that should be qualified as a hate crime. And we need to specifically denounce hate crime because there is something particularly pernicious about that. That's why there's separate legislation for it. So I think you touched on a couple of things. One, we need to have better educated police forces that know how to use the tools that exist. We need to make sure the laws are easier to apply. So that
means you consider changes to the criminal code?
Well, absolutely. Because if anytime there's a barrier to applying a tool, then we have to look at how we refine that tool to make it work more effectively. We should always have a mind to making sure our tools that we use to make a better society are working. If they're there but they don't work, then really there's no point. If we can't apply the tool, then we need to improve it. And in this case, the example you gave is a very powerful example of a massive gap in the law, and we have to find a way to make sure those types of behaviors which meet the definition that obviously should constitute hate crime should be able to fall within the definition legally. And if it doesn't, then we have to change it to make sure it does.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit about what we sort of briefly really touched on. So, some years ago, you were at a gathering and a heckler, Islamophobic heckler came up and started spouting hatred. And you could have very easily responded by saying, I'm not actually Muslim. And I think you rightly could have said that. if you Islamophobe. By the way, it's interesting that Islamophobes tend to be ignorant about religion. So interesting. As do anti-Semites, as do sort of general.
Very ironic, right?
Very interesting.
It's like you want to hate someone because of religion.
I wonder why. Right?
Actually, don't know what religion they are.
It's a very interesting sort of thing that sort of comes up from time to time. And just recently at Muslim Fest, your brother, who we praised, and obviously an MP in his own right, took a very similar stance. So do you mind expanding a little bit? So why is it that when someone comes to you and starts spouting Islamophobic rhetoric, why don't you say, and I think maybe justifiably so, by the way, I'm not Muslim. Maybe expand on your rationale for that.
Yeah, I mean, the basic rationale is if someone came to me saying, I hate you because I think that you're a certain religion, and I say, oh, I'm not that religion, I would be implicitly stating it's okay to hate that person. Because it's like saying, don't attack me, attack them. And that's horrible. Why would I ever do that? That's a wrong thing to do. I think about my mom taught me, my brother, this idea that we're all one, and the idea of our connection. So if someone's hurting you, Mustafa, that it should feel like they're hurting me. And I really come from that place. I believe in that in my core. And it's true, because if someone attacks someone because of their gender, or their race, or their religion, the color of their skin, or who they are, they're attacking all of us. And there is a solidarity. It shouldn't be the responsibility of that one person who's being attacked to stand up to the hate. It should be our collective responsibility to denounce it and stand up together. I really believe in that. Yeah, I was going to go on back and then skid spotted.
No, we could talk about this.
No,
obviously the audience is willing. We've got a full audience to ask you some more questions, so continue the conversation. But let's talk a little bit about what happened at Muslim Fest. And specifically, let's talk about Stephen Garvey for a second. So Stephen Garvey, the individual that was spouting Islamophobic rhetoric, he's a long history in Canada. In Red Deer, he went to a school where there were a number of Syrian refugee students, and he led a protest, spouting nonsense, gathering a racist rally around the school. At a Calgary festival, he went and started interviewing young kids, asking them whether they were Canadian. The sort of upstanding behavior we expect from these kinds of bigots. But Stephen Garvey, he's just the tip of the spear. He's the tip of the iceberg. Because what I want to talk to you about, Mr. Singh, is about the rise of violent white supremacist groups. And the reality is that in Canada, our experts who are in counterterrorism have been telling us that there has been a marked increase of violent white supremacist groups. Let's take the 3 percenters, for example. So the 3 percenters are a group they have chapters across Canada, including in Ontario, by the way. Their Alberta chapter alone on their Facebook page lists 3,000 members. Counterterrorism experts have labeled them the most dangerous group to public security in Canada. Let me tell you about the 3 percenters. They practice with live ammunition, with assault rifles, in various parts of Alberta. They build bombs. They have shown up to peaceful rallies with electricity staffs. Let me tell you guys what an electricity staff is. Somewhere sort of between a cattle prod and a stun gun. This is how they're showing up to sort of peaceful anti-racism rallies, including at Calgary City Hall. And they are premised on an ideology that assumes an apocalyptic showdown between their organization and the Canadian Muslim public. Now let's contextualize that for a second. Imagine for a second that there were a bunch of guys who look like me, Canadian Muslims, up in the forests of Alberta, armed with semi-automatic weapons, training, building bombs, and showing up to City Hall with stun guns. I think we'd be having a national conversation about that. I think that might come up. And I think justifiably so. So my question for you, Mr. Singh, you talked about, in your platform, and you talked about it a little bit today, about, talking about reducing online hate through a national strategy. You talked about hate crime units. But the reality, Mr. Singh, is that neither of those things are complete solutions to dealing with an organization like the 3 percenters. And the reality is that there are many more organizations than the 3 percenters. there's the Soldiers of Odin, there's Pegida, there's WCAI, there's the Northern Guard, and these are organizations that have been active here in the GTA. So, Mr. Singh, how do you plan on dealing with violent white supremacist groups? I mean, you've promised us a strategy on, a national strategy on bicycling. What's going to be the national strategy on fighting groups like the 3 Percenters?
First of all, thank you for sharing about the 3 Percenters, a group that I don't think a lot of people heard very much about, and I think people need to know a lot more about them. What you described is just horrible, the fact that they're organizing and training and showing up at public events armed with weapons that could harm people, particularly the context of where they're showing up. They're showing up in opposition to anti-racism protests or groups. That's deeply concerning. I think there's a couple of reasons why it's happening, and we'll talk about what we can do about it. One of the things that I think we need to call out is that there's one thing to call out hateful speech, which everyone should do, and I think it's very clear that it's happening and it needs to be done. The second level is calling out someone who might be divisive. So people have called out different political leaders in Canada for their divisive positions. But one of the biggest divisive leaders who is perpetually spouting off divisive things and has a huge audience, and it's influencing not just America, but it's influencing Canada, is Mr. Trump. And he needs to be called out. And what we're failing to see at a national level is our Prime Minister hasn't done a good job of calling out and saying Mr. Trump is hateful, divisive, Islamophobic, and that is wrong. And that needs to be done. I think that's an important thing, because without that, it creates essentially a permission or a climate where it's okay to hate and to divide. And I think that's one additional problem. Groups like that should be clearly labeled. If all these criteria being met, these are groups that should meet the definition of a violent group whose membership or that group needs to be investigated. And if any charges can be laid, charges should be laid.
Would you consider listing provisions under the criminal code?
Yeah, so these are types of groups that, when you look at the safety report I just talked about, the safety report went as far as to broadly label all Muslims as a threat, broadly label all Sikhs as a threat, but didn't target specific groups like this. They vaguely mentioned the rise of white supremacy. Look at that. That is a report written by a minister of the Liberal government, and they completely excluded a group that, from what you're describing, should absolutely have been included. So I think we need to do a far better job of looking at the real threats to Canadians, the real threats based on the evidence that we have in front of us, the rise in crime against minority communities, particularly against Muslims, the horrible events in Quebec City, and this type of evidence of groups that you're describing. Those are the threats to people. We see that in the States as well. We've got a president talking about the threat of immigrants when the number of violent offenses or violence that has occurred through white nationalists linked people or domestic terrorism is far, far greater than the fear of anything else that Mr. Trump is talking about. Similarly in Canada, Mr. Trudeau did the same thing, effectively named all these other groups without targeting the real potential risk, and I think that's got to change, and I would work tirelessly to make sure we target the right groups who are actually real threats to Canadians, and that they're investigated appropriately and labeled appropriately.
Because we think that pieces of the criminal code that exist right now, like Section 70, which effectively bans militia groups through an order of council, those could be effective measures that the government could use right now to stop organizations like the 3 Percenters. So we've been talking about the questions around violent white supremacist organizations. But what happens when racism becomes part of policy? And I'm referring, of course, to Bill 21, an act respecting the laicity of states. What happens when discrimination becomes part of policy? In the recent past, the CAQ government passed Bill 21, which effectively bans people from wearing religious symbols and being in certain public sector positions. So that means that if you're wearing a hijab right now in Quebec, you can't become a teacher, you can't become a police officer, you can't become a prosecutor. This is state-sponsored second-class citizenship. There is no doubt about that. This is an attack on everything that we as Canadians stand for. In 2019, the fact that a Jewish man wearing a kippah couldn't be allowed to become a teacher should keep each and every one of us up at night. This is a disgusting piece of legislation, and that's exactly why we at NCCM are fighting. We are right now at the Quebec Court of Appeal fighting this piece of legislation. And we hope to have success there, just as we had success when we previously struck down the niqab ban under the previous administration's Bill 62. And it's hard for us, I get passionate about this because it wasn't so long ago that we had a ban on the potluck, targeting our Indigenous communities. It wasn't that long ago that we had the Chinese head tax. The fact that we are repeating those mistakes in 2019 is deeply saddening to me, and I think it should be deeply saddening to every Canadian, to every Quebecer. So, Mr. Singh, you have made your position in condemning Bill 21 crystal clear. You said you condemn it. That's very clear. It's on the record. But Mr. Singh, this is the greatest civil liberties battle of our generation. And we think, as such, it deserves condemnation in every press conference, at every moment, at every second during this election cycle. So, Mr. Singh, I ask you today, will you commit to making action on Bill 21 an election issue? And Mr. Singh, if you become Prime Minister, what action will you take on Bill 21?
Again, and this is a really important question. Thanks for bringing it up.
I don't mean to be indelicate about this.
No.
But under the legislation, Mr. Singh, you could become Prime Minister. But in Quebec, you couldn't become a teacher. My wife couldn't become a teacher.
I know, it's unreal. There was someone that really drove home the impact of it. I live in BC and I lived in Ontario. I lived in Newfoundland and Labrador, so I don't have the direct connection to Quebec. But I met a young woman who wears a hijab, and she told me this story that really set the contrast about what life is like in Montreal for a woman with a hijab and what life is like in the GTA. So she grew up in Montreal and moved to Toronto just kind of by chance. Her dad got a job in Toronto and moved here. Wasn't because of any sort of change in laws. It was just a thing that happened. And she started wearing hijab in high school. And she was telling the story that she was thinking about being a teacher and thinking about pursuing that line of work. And she started wearing hijab in high school. And as soon as she started wearing hijab, she felt a little bit like she didn't belong. People weren't looking at her the same way, and she felt a little insecure about wearing hijab. So she spoke to one of her teachers. He was an older white guy. And she said, she was seeming a little bit sad, and he kind of said, "Hey, are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm just wearing a hijab now, and people are treating me a little differently. I don't know how I should feel about it." And she said, I don't feel like I'm Canadian enough anymore. And this older white guy teacher from Nova Scotia said to her, "You are exactly what it means to be Canadian. And you are exactly what we look to in the strength of our country, that people can come to this country and be whoever they are and celebrate that. And you wearing a hijab, to me, is what it means to be Canadian." And then that beautiful moment contrasted with that young woman thinking now, if she was still living in Montreal, she couldn't become a teacher. And so it's deeply sad to me that someone who loves science and wants to be a teacher couldn't go on to become a teacher, or someone who cares about the law couldn't become a prosecutor or a judge. It is deeply saddening to me. It's absolutely going the wrong way. And it's a type of law that divides people. And more than just dividing people, kind of what we were saying before, when there's Islamophobia that exists, when there's discrimination that exists, it's essentially the state, the government saying that, yes, it's okay to treat people differently. We're actually going to legally treat people differently. It's okay to treat people differently for the way they look. We've got a law now that confirms that. It is horrible. And I can't think of the word strong enough to condemn it, because it is the exact opposite of what we should do in politics. We should be uniting people instead of dividing people. And so I think about what I can do given this bill. Right after the bill was announced, essentially when it passed, a couple of days later I went to the heart of Quebec. I didn't just go to Montreal, where there's a lot of opposition to this bill. The sitting provincial or the sitting city government, Projet Montréal, they've announced that they were opposed to it. There's a lot of Quebec Solidaire members of provincial parliament that have opposed it. I went to the heart of Quebec, Drummondville, Saint-Hyacinthe, and in those communities I talked about how saddening this bill was. And I would put to you that as a candidate with a turban and a beard who's running in this election being Prime Minister, my presence is an act of defiance of this bill. Me going to Quebec and saying that I want to not only be a teacher, I want to be the Prime Minister of this country is an act of defiance. It is my act to show that this is wrong. It is my presence on the field right now representing myself, my identity, and talking about how we can build a better Canada where we can lift the people of Quebec who are struggling with all the same concerns that people have around healthcare and housing and finding a job and students who are worried about the future. I'm saying to them, I'm going to work towards making your life better, and I have a turban on my head. I think that's a powerful way to reject that notion.
So would that mean then that, since you're in defiance of this, would you come join us in rallies in, Montreal or wherever they're being held in Quebec, standing against Bill 21? Will you organize like national press conferences throughout this election cycle? I'm just trying to dig in. Obviously, you've made your position clear. That's clear on the state of things. But how are you going to make this an election issue?
Just to be really obvious, I got a turban on my head. When I go into Quebec, it's going to be an election issue. Anytime the fact that I haven't withdrawn from the race is an election issue. When I'm in Quebec, all the journalists ask the question, how are you going to become Prime Minister when the Bill 21 has been passed in Quebec? It is an election issue.
How does it already feel?
It's tough. But I don't think about myself. I've got a lot of things going for me, and I've got a lot of supports. I think about the people in Quebec right now, those young people that I've met, the women that I've met who are afraid now that they've got a law that says that you should be discriminated against because of the way you look. It's super divisive. And they've built lives for themselves in Quebec. They love being a part of Quebec. There's a recent story on CBC that talked about a sick woman who left. She was a teacher, trained as a teacher, really excited, trained in Ottawa, came back to her city, loves her community, wanted to teach there, and now had to leave and move and got a job in British Columbia. And it wasn't because she was excited about moving to a new province. She wanted to stay there. That's the harmful impact of it. So it is already an election issue for me. I can't really make it not one. It's going to be an issue because I am who I am. Being in Quebec, and I'm not shying away from it. We've launched an ad recently, a campaign about how we would fight for people in Quebec. And kind of like my brother's response, my response to Islamophobia, if we want to turn people, we can call it out and say this is racist and divisive and hurtful. But imagine you go into a province and people look at you and say, hey, we think you should be discriminated because of the way you look. And that same person says, hey, I want to make sure that you've got more affordable medication. And I want to make sure you've got more affordable housing. I want to make sure that your language is protected because I love the language. I learned it when I was a kid growing up. What a powerful way to tell the people. Like, imagine a person looks at me and says, hey, I don't think you should be a teacher. And I turn around to say to that person, I grew up in Windsor, but I chose to learn French because I love the language. And I want to make sure we defend the ability to speak French. How that person continued to think that it was okay to discriminate against me. I think there's power in standing up to hate and division with love and saying that we can build a better world together.
So with that sort of concludes my initial questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Singh, for talking with me today. This is such an important conversation because all of us as Canadians, whoever you get out and vote for, and I know that our folks from TCMV are going to talk to you a little bit as we end the night about the importance of getting out and voting. It's so important for us to all get educated on the issues, to think about those questions, and to figure out how we're going to move forward as a country. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Janelle.
Thank you both so much. Okay, so we're going to move on to our community partner questions. And first up is Ali Manik, who is, where is he sitting? Oh, Yep, do you want to come? I'm just going to hand you the microphone. And he's going to be asking a question on behalf of the Canadian Muslim Vote. He is the Executive Director of the national nonpartisan nonprofit grassroots organization that aims to increase civic engagement of Canadian Muslims through community outreach and education. So he's asking a question on behalf of that community, and I'm going to be a little bit strict. You have 5 minutes to answer each of these questions. If you want to go less, feel free. We are tight on time, and we want to make sure that we get to everyone.
Hello, Mr. Singh.
What's going on, Talha?
Well, my question is on behalf of the Canadian Muslim Vote, a proud community partner in these leader town hall events. Thank you for being here. Over 60% of Canadian Muslims who responded to the TCMV Federal Issues Survey this year selected immigration as a key election issue. In general, immigration has always been a contentious election issue. Please articulate what you feel is an ideal immigration system in Canada that balances economic obligations and humanitarian commitments.
So first off, I think we should begin by saying that we need immigration. Immigration is a very important thing. It's great for our country. There should be no debate about that. And there's some folks that want to raise that question as a debate. I think there's no debate. Canada needs immigration. Canada is built on immigration. And it is something that we should be celebrated and be thankful that people have chosen to make Canada home. I think that should be without any question. Our system should be one that, of course, balances the need to bring people to Canada who want to come to Canada with the security concerns, making sure there's protocol and all the steps followed that need to be followed. And in terms of our obligation, I think as a country that's able to support people that are fleeing horrible circumstances around the world, we should do our part as members of a global citizenship to say, hey, we've got the resources and the opportunity to take people in. I think it's important for us to be able to do that. When people come to Canada, they should be supported and helped to be able to transition so they can go on and to live their best lives. I think one of the problems in our immigration system right now is there was a lottery system under the Conservatives, which meant that arbitrarily certain people were able to apply for immigration and reunite with their families, and then some people weren't. That system was replaced with a kind of a cap system right now where there was essentially in a span of minutes, all the spots available were filled up. And so people who are permanent residents and citizens who are essentially told that you're allowed to be here, this is your home, were basically given the lack of respect of just having a couple of minutes on a website to be able to reunite with their family. So I think the process should be we do away with the cap, never go back to the lottery, and as people apply, they should be processed quickly and appropriately, and people should be able to reunite with their families, so that's reunification. I think we should do as much as we can to help people around the world who are fleeing persecution and do our best to support them, and really make it clear that this is an economic driver, it's something that enriches our country, it makes it a better place to live, and anyone who wants to say otherwise needs to be called out, and all the evidence we have needs to be pointed out. They're entitled to their own opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And the facts are, immigration is good for our country, it's a driver for the economy and helps support people, and we're doing our part to welcome people from around the world.
Is this one on? Yes, I was told to join you over here so you're not sitting by yourself.
Okay.
So,
yes, yeah, how are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question from the Black Muslim Initiative, a grassroots advocacy and social support organization dedicated to understanding and addressing issues at the intersection of the Black and Muslim experience. And I'm sorry, I don't have a name, so if you could please introduce yourself and ask your question.
My name is Fatah.
You're Fatah.
Hello, Mr. Singh. So my question is on behalf of the Black Muslim Initiative. The Muslim community is extremely diverse. And in addressing Islamophobia, we sometimes fail to address further negative biases received by the Black Muslim community. One area that is often ignored by leaders is youth justice reform. Too many Black Muslim youth are a part of the criminal justice system. Black Muslim youth face unique challenges at the intersection of Islamophobia and anti-Black racism. We know even less of the number of Black Muslim youth that are incarcerated. What will your youth justice reform policy do to ensure that more Black Muslim youth are not caught up in the criminal justice system and can thrive? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And you touched on it, so I'm just going to repeat back what you said, but you know it's so true that when you've got intersections, it just exacerbates inequality. So we already know that in our city, a city that we pride on being a city of diversity, of people coming from all around the world, and being a great community. We love Toronto. I was born here and I love it. But despite that being such a diverse place, it's a place where if you are Black, you are discriminated disproportionately when it comes to police interaction. So if you're Black, you're stopped far more often than people who aren't. So add that to existing Islamophobia, so someone who's Black and Muslim is going to feel even more of the brunt of that inequality or that discrimination. And that's horrible, to feel like you don't belong because of the color of your skin and your religion is just a extremely hurtful and a powerful barrier to overcome, and it's got to change. Our justice system has a number of flaws, and one of the flaws is it's designed in a way where the goal is not rehabilitation, and supports the goal as a mix of denunciation and rehabilitation. And it doesn't actually work. That system of justice doesn't actually make safer communities. There's strong evidence that suggests putting people in jail for longer periods of time doesn't actually result in people who are any better equipped to deal with life and the struggles of life. They're not any less likely to commit crimes. It doesn't reduce recidivism. And we've got evidence in the States, mandatory minimums and putting people in jail for longer periods of time did not reduce crime rates. It doesn't actually reduce the problems in society. So we need to take a different approach if we want different results. If our goal is to make a safer society and the evidence shows that our current approach isn't working, then why would we keep on doing it? So my approach, and what I think we need to do with reforming the justice system, particularly for young people, should be a focus on rehabilitation, on support services, not on criminalization. It doesn't actually develop a better society. It doesn't actually reduce crime. It doesn't develop safer communities. So I think that's one general approach. And a lot of the experts in communities where they see youth who get over-criminalized, they see youth who get caught up in the justice system, they've got the solutions. They say kids need to have more hope, more opportunity, and more supports. They need to have the opportunity to be mentored. They need to know that they can get a good job, they can go on to school, they can pursue their dreams. And if we provide those supports and that investment, we can actually tackle the root causes and actually give people a better life and give young people a more promising future. So those are some of the things. I think carding, when you disproportionately have contact with the police, it increases the likelihood of getting charged or getting arrested, and we have to tackle that. And the approach has to be rehabilitation, supports, building a safer community, as opposed to just the status quo way of dealing with the criminal justice system, which has been to criminalize particularly disproportionately Black and marginalized people.
Thank you so much for your question. Okay, so our next community question comes from the University of Toronto's Muslim Students Association, a campus group that was formed to serve and represent the needs of Muslim students on and off campus. They've actually asked me to ask the question on their behalf. It's a little bit of a delicate question, so I'm just going to read it. It was sent to me here. As a federal candidate running for the premiership of this country, what do you specifically plan to do about the surveillance of Muslims by Canadian national security organizations such as the RCMP and CSIS? So that was a story came out a couple of weeks ago, actually, from a media outlet, a competitor, so I won't say their name, but a story about a group being formed as a hotline, essentially, for students who have been questioned, approached, some could say targeted, harassed, by surveillance groups like CSIS. So to the question from the MSA, and your 5 minutes, please.
Sure. Those stories are really, really hard to hear. A lot of marginalized communities that are already faced with lots of barriers and challenges are then further faced with challenges because of these type of police interactions and then surveillance from organizations like CSIS. And just imagine being stopped by someone with the heaviness of knowing that they're from CSIS, this high-level security agency, it makes you immediately feel like there's something wrong with you, that you're dangerous and you're bad. I haven't done anything. Why is this happening? It is a horrible feeling, and it should not happen. And it really speaks to that ongoing problem that I talked about earlier with the safety report. The Canadian government, it's not a by chance or a coincidence, it's a decision. We heard Mustafa talk about the 3% and the lack of response, the seriousness of that, and then you've got students on campus that get stopped by CSIS. I mean, there is something clearly wrong with that contrast. There is something off. And it's not a mistake or a chance, it's a decision. That report was written, people looked at it, double-checked it, and then they released it, put it on their website, and it was up there for 6 months, and people said, hey, why would you write it this way? That was a decision made by this current government, Mr. Trudeau, and the minister that wrote it, Minister Goodale, and his staff. And this same decision with CSIS is a concerted decision that's being made. They're saying, these are people that are dangerous. Police these bodies, police these people. That's got to change. We've got to make better decisions based on evidence, not based on suspicion or based on Islamophobic held beliefs. We've got to make decisions based on real, quantifiable, substantive evidence. If there is a real concern, then it can be investigated, but we shouldn't take this blanket approach that's been happening with carding, that's happening with the RCMP, that's happening with CSIS, which does not respond to a real threat, but a perceived threat. And all that does is make people who already feel marginalized feel even more marginalized.
Okay, we're moving to our last question from our community partners, and this comes from Sabrine Ezrak from the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. They're an organization that focuses on affirming the identities of Canadian Muslim women and promoting an understanding of their lived experiences. And I think this is her over here. Sabrine, if you could please ask your question.
Actually, she's sick today, I'm replacing her. I'm president of CCMW Chapter, and our question is, gender Islamophobia is proving devastating for Canadian Muslim women. If the NDP forms the government, how will you address this pressing issue?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. We talked about the earlier intersection, if you're Black and you're Muslim, how that makes things very difficult. It kind of exacerbates a problem. And for Islamophobia and barriers, I think the most impacted community would probably be if you're hijab wearing. I was head wrap sister right beside me. It's so tough. I mean, I can say this is something that I sort of understand a little bit, because being very visible, I see the looks and stares, and that's one level of it. But then, when we talk about bills like Bill 21, there's actually legislation that's discriminating against hijab wearing women. We know that in society there's already challenges of sexism that exist. Women are far underrepresented in politics, at the federal level, dismally underrepresented. They're underrepresented in positions of power. And if you add that already barrier and add in being a hijab wearing woman, it's just horrible. So first of all, Janelle, it's awesome having you. You're breaking lots of barriers. Having people see you, I'm sure young women with a hijab see you on TV and say, wow, like we belong. It's amazing. I think there's power in representation. So women that achieve higher levels of power and higher positions, and when they're visible and seen, I think that's amazing. I think we need to work to support that. We've got candidates running for us, and candidates that are elected in positions of power also helps to substantiate their worth and value that, hey, you can be hijab wearing and you can be elected. I think there's a long way for us to go, but I think as a government, what I would do is we've got to do more to tear down the stigma that exists. We've got to do more to change the narrative. We've got to work to make sure that no bills like Bill 21 can exist. We've got to there's just so much to do. I'm kind of overwhelmed by thinking about how much of a challenge this is. But I think with the new Democratic government, you can get at least this confidence that I care, I understand, and I've got the courage to do something about it.
Thank you so much to our community partners for the questions, and we're going to move on to the questions from our audience. As I mentioned, you can use your social media to ask the question using the hashtag NCCM Townhall. We also had cue cards passed around, so I'm actually going to start with one of those questions from the audience that came on a cue card, and if you do need one, you can just raise a hand. We've got volunteers over there who are passing them out. So the first question comes from someone in the audience who submitted this via cue card. The question is the NDP willing to take a progressive human rights stance in relation to Palestine and Venezuela?
Free Palestine.
Yes.
No, we're taking questions from the
I submitted that question.
Oh, that's your question?
Yeah, that was my question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, thank you for your question.
He wants credit.
My name is YC Lee, and I'm actually working with the NDP. There's a group called Socialist Action. We're in the NDP Socialist Caucus.
Okay, I'm gonna direct, we're short on time, so I'm gonna ask Mr. Singh to answer the question. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, so answer yes, absolutely. I've called out illegal settlements and how that is an impediment to peace. I've called out heavy-handed military action and the violence, the human rights violations. I think it's important to be able to call that out wherever that exists. With Venezuela, I've been really clear that it should be the people of Venezuela that determine their future. I don't believe in interventionism, and I don't believe that unless there's some really clear evidence that it would actually benefit the country. The track record of interventionism has only destabilized and made countries worse off than before. So I've not seen evidence of how it actually helps out countries. I think it's our job to support democracy and support the people of any kind of community to be able to exercise their democratic rights and support them in achieving their own goals, as opposed to intervening and in putting on kind of the Western democratic viewpoints of what should happen. It should be communities that make decisions.
Thank you for the question. Our next question comes from Twitter. The person asks, what would you do differently to the national climate strategy? This question, comes on the heels of news of the Green Party wooing some, NDP members. So why don't you talk about your climate strategy?
Sure. So climate change, it's not a proportional word, I think, to what's going on. And so I've been calling it and speaking about it as a climate crisis or catastrophic climate change, because that's really what's happening. And for me, why it's so important, I think about the people impacted. It's not a distant, vague thing. In Canada, people are feeling the impacts right now. Canada is a country that's warming faster than many other countries in the world. So we're feeling the impacts here. And in BC, where I'm now the member of parliament, I met a woman who had a young baby, and she told me her biggest concern was the climate crisis. And I assumed that it was because her baby would grow up in a planet that would be perhaps not habitable. And she said, yes, I'm worried about the future, but not the distant future. I'm worried about next summer because the past 2 summers in a row, the forest fires have been so intense that on some days, doctors advised us not to go outside, that it was dangerous to breathe the air. I'm worried about my baby breathing the air on some days. And I've met with people in Eastern Canada who've seen their homes wiped away. And when someone loses their home because of extreme weather caused by climate change and climate crisis, it is indescribable, the pain of losing the place that's most precious to you, your home. So what we need to do is a whole bunch of things. First of all, end the subsidies for the fossil fuel sector. We're spending billions of dollars on the fossil fuel sector that should go towards renewable and clean energy. We should immediately stop exempting the biggest polluters. Mr. Trudeau put forward a plan to put a price on pollution, but the biggest polluters were exempted, and that's got to stop immediately. The biggest polluters have to pay their fair share. On top of that, what we're proposing are commitments to retrofit all buildings and homes. As the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases, if we can reduce the energy demands of buildings and homes, it creates jobs, because those are jobs in communities. It saves money for families because they can reduce their energy costs, and it reduces emissions. We want to invest in public transit, electrified transportation. We can do a lot, actually. It's really hopeful. The opportunities are there to create 300,000 jobs at a minimum with our plan, even more. And we can actually tackle this climate change, this climate crisis, and create opportunities for work that are long-lasting and sustainable. So I'm really excited about the potential. The problem is pretty dire, but there's a lot of hope in what we can do if we work together.
So we'll just ask a follow-up question. Yesterday, Elizabeth May was in town, and she was speaking about having a wartime cabinet almost to bring all party leaders, as you said, to talk about it as a climate emergency. Is that something that you would be on board with?
I mean, the wartime council kind of sounds a bit weird to me, that concept. Again, if I'm being really real, but it is a serious crisis. We put forward a motion calling it a climate emergency. It is a climate emergency, and I would work with anyone who's willing to take this as a serious issue. I've only said that because of the position that Conservatives have taken on a whole host of issues, that they're not someone I would work with, unlike Ms. May, who said that she would work with the Conservatives, given their position on a host of different issues, whether it's a woman's right to choose, whether it's minority communities' rights, LGBTQ communities' rights. Based on a whole number of reasons, I would not support the Conservatives, but I'm willing to work with anyone. I think we need to work together to solve this problem, and I'm prepared to do that.
I won't stray too far off script before I get in trouble. So we'll move on to the next question, which also comes from Twitter. The person asks, what will the NDP do to improve the recognition of foreign credentials, one of the tools of social exclusion? So we hear about this a lot, right? Folks who come from other countries who are educated but are unable to put that education or credentials to use in the field of their education.
Yeah, someone was telling me this like kind of awkward joke that didn't really land that well, but he was kind of saying that if the safest place to, if you're wanting to have a baby, the safest place to do it would be in a taxi cab. Even though it was a horrible joke, the concept behind it is that there's a lot of people that are incredibly trained. I think the concept was there's an incredible number of people that are trained and qualified in their fields of expertise that aren't able to express that expertise and aren't able to be recognized for that. And it's not just something that we miss out on in terms of that person missing out on their own potential, but we all miss out on what they could have contributed if we recognize their skills. So recognizing international training is something that has come up a lot. A lot of people have expressed frustration about it, but it hasn't been addressed, and it has to be. And so I would commit at the federal level to creating a federal framework to design a better way for us to connect the international skills and training with the opportunities that exist in Canada, and recognizing those skills, recognizing that talent, recognizing that experience is something we have to do, because we're missing out on all those talented folks that are not really able to live their best lives, and we're not able to benefit from their contributions.
And do you think that there needs to be a better way to kind of also standardize it, because we hear that it's different often from yes, exactly.
Yeah, so the barrier to this is there's provincial bodies that are responsible for setting the standards, so teaching or medicine or dentistry. There's provincial regulations that determine if someone qualifies or not, so that's a part of the problem. But there's got to be a way for us to work through that challenge. There's no way that in 2019, with the technology and tools at our disposal, that we can't recognize internationally trained people. I don't accept that it's not possible. We've got to find a way to do it.
And I understand that often the fees as well are often a huge barrier.
Well, I mean, the fees are really enormous. The pathway, when someone comes with international training, they say, okay, you can be recognized if you spend thousands of dollars and wait 4 years. And so someone comes here with all this talented training, and they're told, wait 4 years before you can work, and they come with a family, and they come with kids, and so how are they able to consider waiting 4 years before they can work in their field, and then out of frustration they have to work in a different field? And that's something that is also another barrier. So sometimes they're kind of misled to believe that yes, you can be recognized if you put out all this money and spend all this time, and it's really frustrating for someone who's got all that same training and skill set that's just not being recognized.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is the last question or if we're going to have any more coming, but this one comes from someone in the audience via Q card. If elected, what would you do about Canada's arms deal with Saudi Arabia, given the atrocities they have?
Yeah, so we have a provision in Canadian law. The Canadian government has a provision that can be used if there's a human rights violation or if there's evidence of human rights violations, that we can cancel a trade or an arms deal. I can't think of a more clear example than Saudi Arabia. This is a country that is implicated in the alleged murder of a journalist. They're killing people in Yemen, and they systematically oppress their own citizens. If there's not another example, what else? If there's not another example for when we should use our discretion to say we should not be selling arms to this country, I can't imagine another example that's more clear. So I would immediately end that agreement. There's other ways we can protect the jobs. We do not need to be selling this.
Okay, this question comes to us from Twitter, and we alluded to this earlier. You had yesterday in the news, we heard that some former NDP candidates in New Brunswick left the NDP, and we heard from one of those members that part of the reason was they said they were concerned that some voters wouldn't vote for someone with a turban. These folks have now been accepted by the Green Party. So how are you responding to this news, and how are you feeling about it?
I think the Green Party's got a lot to answer for. The fact that they're accepting people that are openly saying we're not comfortable getting elected because the leader looks different. I mean, that's deeply concerning. We just talked about Islamophobia. We just talked about how we need to denounce any form of division and hate, and they're welcoming with open arms people who are saying that we're not going to run for someone because of the way they look. I think that's pretty problematic. But I mean, again, I think about that's a challenge that sure I have to face that. That's a challenge I face most of my life. That people say because of the way I look, you can't succeed. You can't go on to become a lawyer. You can't go on to become an elected official. You can't become the leader of a national party. I've been told lots of times that I can't. But I'm not alone. A lot of people are told they can't. I'm sure, Janelle, you were told you can't be a hijab-wearing black woman and be in journalism. And you broke that barrier, and you're here today. It's amazing. You've inspired people. Lots of people are told that they can't all the time because of their sexuality, because of their gender, because of their religion, because they're Muslim. They're told again and again that they can't, it's our job to collectively say, yes, we can, and we will, and we're going to get it done. For sure.
I want to follow up a little bit and push back a little bit because I know that one of the other reasons that folks alluded to leaving the party was feeling that you haven't made your presence known in New Brunswick. What is your message to the people of New Brunswick, especially now that they have seen this mass exodus, and are you still planning to bring candidates to those 10 ridings, and will you be going there and when?
Yeah, so we're going to have candidates in all those ridings within about a week. We have them lined up. I think that those folks and maybe the Green Party are underestimating the people of New Brunswick. I think they're counting them out. I don't think that their assessment of the people of New Brunswick is correct. I grew up in Atlantic Canada. I lived in Newfoundland and Labrador for about 5 years when I was a kid. And people on the East Coast are welcoming, good-hearted people. And so I think they're kind of counting them out. I'm not going to count them out. I know there's amazing people in this country. While we face a lot of challenges, there's a lot of racism that exists. I faced it. A lot of the people in this room have faced it. I know it's real, but there's still a lot of people that are allies, that are supporters, that care about building a better Canada, where we come together and we support each other.
Thank you so much for your time and for taking these questions. We are unfortunately out of time, so we're going to wrap up this portion of the evening. And I want to give Jagmeet Singh a round of applause for being here. So I also want to ask for a round of applause for NCCM, Canadian Muslim Vote, and all of the community partners. And as we bring this evening to a close, I do want to invite Ali Manik from Canadian Muslim Vote back up to the stage to say a few words.
Can I just set up, there's a whole row right here of Ontario New Democratic MPPs. We're here starting with Dolly Bega, my brother Jagmeet Singh.
It's a great opportunity for you to engage with some other politicians who are here this evening, who are your representatives as well. So thank you so much.
Of course.
We want to thank you. I want to thank your brother for standing up against that Islamophobic, racist guy. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And once again, my name is Ali Manik, and thank you so much for being here and being a part of this. Let's give a round of applause to Mr. Jagmeet Singh. How many of you guys are voting on October 21st? Let me hear you. That doesn't sound like a whole bunch of voters. How many of you guys are voting on October 21st? That's right. This is, and I can't reiterate the importance of this election, not just for the Muslim community, but for all of us to be present at this election and to be voting in this election. And so it inspires me that you're all here today. In 2015, when the Canadian Muslim Vote, this national non-partisan organization, was founded, the work that we did was tremendous. In the ridings that we were most active in, the Muslim community reported had a 79% voter turnout in 2015. That's incredible. And in the ridings where the Canadian Muslim Vote were most active, that was even higher. And since then, as we've heard, since that time, we have seen a rise in Islamophobia. We've seen a platform for the right wing. We have seen steps being taken to combat the progress that we as a community have made to move forward. And so this election, I contend, is the most important election in the history of Canadian Muslims. This election on October 21st, 2019 is the most important election in the history of our community here in Canada. So being a part of that election is extremely important. Being here today and coming to the rest of our Leader Town Hall meetings is going to be very, very important. I also would invite you, please, to join our organization in some capacity. Every week we've got phone banks at our head office in Regent Park. We've got a number of different regional activities that are taking place across the country, all nonpartisan, all to increase voter turnout and all to break down any barriers that exist to democracy in this country for our communities. So please do engage with us. We will make voting easy for all of us, inshallah. So please sign up to our mailing list outside. Speak to us. There's a number of people. You see us all wearing our TCMV shirts. Ask us if you have any questions. Volunteer some time with us. Donate to the organization. Sign up for our mailing list. And please make sure that you, your friends, your family, every single person remembers this. We are loudest when we vote. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, Ali. And finally, to close off the event, we're going to hear some final remarks from NCCM's Executive Director, Mustafa Farouk. We can welcome him to the stage one last time.
Thank you very much. I requested that I go before Ali Manik. It's really hard to close after him. I also got a question, Mr. Singh, from my family members, which is a really hard-hitting one, for me at least. The question was, how are you so photogenic? And what style tips can you give to our brother so that he can stop wearing, whatever he's wearing? So
you're doing all right, man.
I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone here. And again, I want to reiterate the need for everyone to go out and vote. Obviously, we're a nonpartisan organization, but it's a nonpartisan statement to say that everyone needs to be involved, everyone needs to be engaged in this upcoming election. I want to tell you that this is just the first of a series of town halls, as you've heard tonight. And on Friday, we will actually be engaging in a dialogue with the leader of the Green Party, Elizabeth May, right back here at the University of Toronto in Hart Hall. So come out for that, make your voices heard, talk to folks, engage your leaders. I also just want to sort of make a pitch. Doing events like this, they aren't free, they aren't cheap. So as you go outside, you're going to see the folks that we're working with, folks like the MSA, the TCMD, NCCM, the Black Muslim Initiative. For the cost of a cup of coffee a month is what people say. Make sure that you donate a little bit before you leave. Help us cover costs like these events, like other events in the future, and so that we can hold, folks to account, so we can engage in dialogue. Obviously, as we are in the midst of our litigation on Bill 21, we're in the midst of the biggest civil liberties challenge in a generation. Any support is appreciated. I also just want, before closing off, to give a big thank you to Janelle Massa. Hey. What can I say? She's awesome. Every time she graces the stage, it teaches all of us so much about what does leadership mean? What does it mean to be articulate? I say that as a lawyer. So thank you again, Janella. And again, a big thank you to Mr. Singh for coming out tonight. And a big thanks to all of you. Thank you all. Have a great night. Assalamu alaikum.